Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Let's Watch 2 podcast, a podcast with aspirations of discovering the ultimate double feature. My name is Sam, and joining me today is a very special guest, the wonderful Celeste de la Cabra. Welcome, Celeste.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Did you want to tell us, because maybe people don't know like who you are and what you do in this space, in YouTube and film in general. So before we, start off proceedings on the podcast, do you want to tell people like what you're about, like what you do on YouTube and things like that?
Sure. So my name is Celeste de la Cabra. I use they and she pronouns, and I have a YouTube channel where I do sort of in-depth discussions and more analytical videos about films, but then I also do more casual, fun, hangout style videos with my girlfriend about just my Blu-ray collection and things like that. So I try to strike a balance between thoughtful and entertaining, academic and accessibility. It's always walking a fine line, but I like to think we do our best, and we have fun over there. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, thoughtful discussions on art house and cult films, which I have lately been less and less convinced are actually different things. They're like two sides of the same coin to me, in terms of what they accomplish and what I get out of them. So those are my general passions. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, which if you are watching a podcast about these two films, I imagine you are, come hang out.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. I think one of the first videos I saw of yours was when you did like an analysis of Hellraiser, which is that's my first exposure to your you and your channel and just like what sort of content you put out there, and I was thoroughly impressed with it, so I subscribed immediately. And then it turns out that we knew people within the space, like Ryan from Disconnected, who I'd been following for quite some time, and then you've guested on his channels quite a number of times, and good friends with him, and so it's all good. It's like just reached out to you because I thought with this behemoth of a double feature that we could possibly tackle this somehow thoughtfully, but we'll see how that goes. So today's episode is going to be talking about the David Lynch's Eraserhead from 1977, his debut feature, and then pairing that with another debut feature, full-length debut feature from Shinya Tsukamoto from 1989. And as I said, these are both quite heavy films, thematically speaking, and sort of open to a vast array of interpretations. So we'll see what the two of us can come up with today. So, as always, we'll start with the film that was released first chronologically. So we're going to talk about Lynch's Eraserhead, which is pretty much a labor of love for Lynch. It's an unbridled vision from the man, and it's very much a cornerstone of cult cinema. It's like a seminal midnight movie as well. It's not the early ones, because you've got things like El Topo from Jodorowsky that is, sometimes categorized as being like the first true midnight movie, but it's one of the big ones that was a midnight movie. And yeah, it's definitely something that's very enigmatic. So Celeste, can you share with me and the viewers and listeners out there what your history is with the Eraserhead and also Lynch? Because my favorite director of all time is Lynch, and I know you're quite fond of the man yourself, so maybe we can get a bit of discussion on Eraserhead and Lynch in general here.
Well, that's exciting, because David Lynch is also my favorite director of all time. I wasn't 100% sure about that for a while. There's always a few names floating around, and I'm like, But I think it was after I finished Twin Peaks that I was just like, or maybe after I watched Lost Highway, one of those two, where I was just like, I think I'm just on his wavelength in a way that I'm not with other people, or that other people don't seem to be with him. The aesthetics that he creates and the themes that he explores are so, I guess they just make sense to me, and they emotionally connect with me like really deeply. My favorite Lynch film is Mulholland Drive. That would be in my top 5 films of all time. But Eraserhead is another one that's very special. It's one that I arrived to maybe a little bit later. It's not like one of the first ones I ever watched from him, and it was one that I was a little bit intimidated by, just because it's, it's at the time I thought it was maybe going to be his most artsy, though I've come to find out that that's not true. uh, and yeah, it just has a reputation for being extremely enigmatic and like difficult to parse through and understand. Um, and when I first watched it, to be honest with you, I didn't feel that that was necessarily as true as I was led to believe. Like, I think that the visuals are certainly difficult to, like, this is kind of where I think people get tripped up on Lynch's stuff, is they try to come up with a logical explanation for everything that happens in the film.
Yeah.
And you just can't do that. Like, I don't even think he's doing that. Like,
No.
he is very much operating on dream logic and on vibes. And
Yep.
if he can come up with an image in his head that he feels is emotionally consistent with the project that he's creating, he's just going to do it and he's not going to question it. Um, and I think once you accept that and you understand that and you just let yourself feel the visuals as opposed to trying to necessarily intellectualize or maybe perfectly rationalize everything that's happening, you kind of get a thematic through line that I think is ultimately very consistent and can be uh, more digestible. So, yeah, that's my spiel on Lynch, I guess. What is your history with him and this film in particular? I'm curious.
Yeah, Lynch. I think my first Lynch was Blue Velvet, and I was fairly lukewarm on it, to be honest. There were lots I liked about it, but there was something about his style of filmmaking that wanted me to just, delve further into the man and understand what everyone was raving about, basically, because he's he's widely loved and revered amongst film lovers around the world. So I thought, oh, okay, I was like, I liked it, but I wasn't like, oh, that's a masterpiece or anything like that. So I thought I'd go into further, and then I watched Lost Highway. I didn't like it, and then I watched Mulholland Drive, and I didn't like it, and then I watched Twin Peaks, and I absolutely adored it. So I think Twin Peaks was my proper like gateway into Lynch's world, and I
Yeah.
think reflecting on all of my watching first time viewing experiences, that I maybe should have started with Twin Peaks. But that's not necessarily to say if you love Twin Peaks, you're going to like the rest of Lynch's worlds that he creates in his films, because it's not the case for some people, because there are a lot of diehard Twin Peaks fans that don't particularly like David Lynch's other work, for instance. But then after watching Twin Peaks and understanding more about who he was, like his history, his upbringing, his just sensibilities and everything like that, I then went back and rewatched everything. And Mulholland Drive is now my favorite film of all time.
Hell yeah.
It's I have, and I can't see, you can't see it because it's just over there, but I have a commissioned piece of artwork just above where my TV is of Mulholland Drive. There's only 23 copies of that piece of artwork in the world, and it's one of my prized things I actually own. Absolutely adore that. And then I carry on watching his films more and more, and Lost Highway is probably in my top 20 films ever. There's still one film of his that I don't connect with, and that is Inland Empire. I find it fascinating and interesting, and there are specific moments in that film that really either scare me or just exhilarate me, or I find just really odd and interesting. But for the most part, Laura Dern is absolutely incredible in the film from start to finish, but I don't connect emotionally to that film in any way. Maybe that will change as I grow and I have more life experience, and because I do revisit it like once every 5 years or so, and it's still feeling the same, but I will continue to rewatch it every so often just to get a feel if I'm interacting or connecting with it differently. And then to circle back round to Eraserhead, this was one that I then watched like for the first time after I'd watched a bunch of his films like for a few times. So this is something I watched The Straight Story before I watched Eraserhead for the first time, which is maybe one of the least Lynchian films. It's also one of his best films, but
I
it's
love
one of
it.
it's so good. But it's also it's got some Lynchian moments in it. But
Sure,
how
yeah.
people understand Lynch generally is one of his least Lynchian, one of his most accessible films. And with more exposure for myself to art house cinema and just weird psychotronic cult cinema, absolutely fell in love with Eraserhead. Yeah, I think this is maybe the third or fourth time I've seen the film, mainly because I don't feel it's overly rewatchable because it's such a jarring, nauseating, uncomfortable, anxiety-inducing film. And sometimes that's exactly what I need in my life for some reason, and I want to sit down and watch that sort of thing. But Eraserhead just hits a certain nerve that it just makes me so uncomfortable. But I just can't. It's like a car crash that you just can't look away from. I'm just utterly absorbed into the visuals and the sound design, which I think is maybe one of the best things about the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the production history of the film. So the film was, as I said at the top of the show, much a labor of love for Lynch, and he sort of took up filmmaking at, I can't remember what it was, maybe the University of Philadelphia. I'm not sure where he studied, but he wanted to drop out because he lost interest in it, and he was doing painting. All his life he's been doing art, and then basically he was given a grant to make his own feature film. And well, it was actually a short film that then turned into a feature film, and the production took like 6 years, which is a very long time for a film to be. It wasn't in continuous production. There was a lot of filming for a little while, stopping, going back to filming. I think I read that the longest stretch of time between filming one scene and then filming another was 1 year. So, and then going back to the sound production, after the film finished, Lynch was in like the sound studio for up to a year, making all these sounds for the film, so eerie and industrial sounds, like that very much reflect the environment that our character, the protagonist, what's his name, Henry Spencer, played by the amazing Jack Nance, is in. And yeah, I'm not sure how you feel about the sound design. We're both quite into sort of music a lot, maybe a lot of experimental, dark, moody music. And although the sound design in this film, because it's not really, there are a few bits of music in the film, but it's not really, you could say it's music. They're more like, it very much is like a sound track, like not two separate words. So it very much complements the image, something like an installation of sorts, sort of thing. I don't know how to describe it, but it's very much,
it's like an auditory landscape that you're just kind of
exactly,
occupying, like sort of in the way that you can't really piece out the visuals into specific songs, as it were, is how the soundtrack kind of works too. It's all kind of together and working in tandem, with the exception of the few sort of diegetic music pieces, which are very good. Big fan. But yeah, I'm all about like fucking like industrial dark ambient noise music and all that kind of stuff. I like it as its own thing, and I like it incorporated into more accessible genres as well. And so kind of incorporating that or utilizing it as film score is something that really stuck out to me on this viewing, especially because the first time I watched it on the Criterion channel and the second time I watched it on my Blu-ray with the fucking uncompressed audio, I was just like, God damn, this is something else. Like, you could tell how much time he spent on it, because it's just completely encapsulating and impossible to ignore. And like, I agree, as important as the visuals and probably as good, if not better. I feel very similarly about Tetsuo, but we'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. Lynch has always been about sound in his films. Like, he's always wanted to go into filmmaking because he's always wanted to like animate his paintings. Basically, all of the images that he has had in his head, he wanted to basically make them move. So, but then he's always been a very audio driven person as well, and all of his films have generally pretty immaculate sound design and music choices and things like that. themes of the film, the interpretation is, there are some widely regarded interpretations for this film. Some that I agree with. I mean, the main one, I don't know how you see this film, is that the most of this film is in Henry's mind, or he's either imagining this like a daydream, or he's literally asleep, and this is all basically a nightmare, a state of being, and he's just constantly in fear of being a father. So the basic plot summary is that Henry has fathered a child, and he marries this young woman, and they live in this apartment that is just nightmare fuel in itself. The window is bricked off, at least for some of the film. So when he looks out the window, all he sees is just a brick wall, and there's dirt and like a dead tree in the corner next to his bedstand, and it's just a nightmare. And the way I interpret the set out of that room particularly is like the bricked off wall window is like he's literally like boxed in, like in his mind. He can't escape because he has this fear of being a father, and his child is one of the weirdest creations in cinema history. And we talk about maybe how Lynch made the baby, which is nicknamed Spike. So it's not named as Spike in the film, but Jack Nance during production called it Spike. So to fans of this film, the baby is called Spike, which wails uncontrollably and spits its food up and laughs at Henry in certain situations in the film, and it's just generally unnerving, especially when there's one moment in this film that I can't find quite funny, actually, is when the baby is like wailing because it's ill or something like that, and then Henry turns around and then the baby is like covered in all these like pustules or something like that, and he goes, "Oh, you are sick." And it's just like, I found it hilarious on this watch because of just the way he reacts to it, as if to say the baby's been putting this on the whole time, and he's just like, "Oh, actually there is something wrong with you." How do you feel about Spike, or the mutant baby? Like, how do you think Lynch made it? Because he was very secretive, and he's still not revealed to this day how he made Spike. Don't know if you have any thoughts on
the
it.
Eraserhead baby is just iconic. Truly, what an icon. One of my favorite things I have is a sticker on my car that says Eraserhead baby on board, and like the triangle.
That's amazing.
I love that. I don't know. That's the special thing. I know that like Ryan in the Disconnected Discord for one of his most recent streams asked people what the best movie prop of all time is, and I was like, well, it's obviously the Eraserhead baby. Like, that's just not even a question. Upon watching it again, and I watched most of the Eraserhead Stories documentary. I kind of fell asleep because I was really pushing it. But he kind of, apropos of nothing, had a story about like convincing a vet to give him a dead cat so that he could like cut it up and study it. It was very bizarre. And then kind of reading the Wikipedia article about it, a lot of people have guessed that it is some kind of, because it looks so organic, and so like people are guessing that it's like a skinned rabbit or like maybe a baby lamb that he's then somehow managed to make move at his will. I don't know. As the person that I am, I would prefer not to think about that because that is unfortunate to me. But I guess it is what it is. So maybe it's a cat. I don't know. But apparently I was also reading that one of the scenes that was cut was a scene of Jack Nance just kind of playing with a dead cat for a while. So I guess that's probably what that is. After reading that it might be a rabbit or a lamb, I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. It does kind of look like that.
It does look like it could be that. But then I'm still fascinated on how he may have been able to have like animate it, because it's not stop animation either. It's not like, as we'll talk about in Tetsuo, there's a lot of stop animation, stop photography sort of stuff for the effects, but in this it's all continuous in camera
It's moving in the shot
yeah,
for sure.
and it looks like it's breathing, and it looks like it has real eyes that are moving. So it's very concerning, and it does the job. It creeps you out, and you understand to some respect why the parents of this child are disturbed by this baby.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's an odd one, and I think, up to the individual to decide how they feel about what Lynch may have done to have created such an abomination. But
I think it's kind of fun that he doesn't tell people. Like, on the supplements for the Elephant Man, there was a talk at some kind of university, and the first question someone asked was, "Could you please tell me how you made the Eraserhead baby?" And he was just like, "No."
yeah,
So I think that's kind of fun, but it's also like, huh, maybe you
I
had to
know.
do something a little sketchy to get this
I
accomplished,
think
and that's
so.
why you're not telling people.
Exactly. I think there's I don't know where I read this either, but he blindfolded one of
Mhm.
the cinematographers when he was setting up the props in some of the scenes, so that they weren't able to see exactly what he was doing and how he did it. And then when it was all like staged, like on the, because I think it's so strangely positioned, because it's always facing towards the wall at an angle. And I don't know if that's to do with any of the mechanical movements underneath the table, maybe to get the baby to move, but it's always just facing in a strange direction. It's never facing into the room. It's always facing the wall and at an angle, and it's always strange. But yeah, and then he would like unblindfold the cinematographers so that they could like actually shoot the scenes. So yeah, interesting. So moving on to some of the things that I noticed, particularly on this time watching, is some of the motifs that Lynch would then use repeatedly throughout his filmography, like the Twin Peaks chevron zigzag pattern is in the
Mhm.
lobby of the building, like when Henry goes to the lift and it takes forever for the doors to close. Just reminded me of the scene from Twin Peaks The Return when the guy's sweeping the Bang Bang Bar for 5 minutes, the floor of the Bang Bang Bar, if you remember that, to the green
Mhm.
onions. And I was just like, when are the doors going to close? When are the doors going to close? Oh, they've closed now. Okay, cool. But then you're noticing the floor, and it's exactly the same chevron zigzag pattern, black and white. Obviously, the cinematography is in black and white, but you're assuming that these are black and white chevrons. And also, he uses the electromagnetic buzz sound a lot, which is
Mhm.
very prominent in Twin Peaks as well. Lampshades are prominent in the film. I know Lynch used to make his own furniture and lampshades and things like that were in like Mulholland Drive, and he made all the furniture that was in Lost Highway, very angular, sparse furniture, but yeah, just lots of things like that. And there's also stages and curtains, which are used a lot
Mhm.
in Lynch's works. Obviously, we have. Let's talk about this for a second. The lady in the radiator.
Mhm.
What do we make of the lady in the radiator? What does she symbolize to you, Celeste? Because I haven't the foggiest.
So, especially for a film like this, I think that it's going to be subjective, and this is just going to be my best guess, right? Because I don't think even Lynch fully knows, and if he does, he's sure as shit not going to tell you. But to get to my thoughts on that, I think I have to circle back and sort of outline what I think the film is about in general.
So,
Um, and I agree with you. I think that this is, I don't know about like the literal mechanics of what's happening in our main character's head and how much of it is quote unquote actually happening in the context of the film. I'm not really sure about that, but to me, this is clearly just like a visualization and an exploration in a kind of nightmare esque logic. David Lynch's supreme fear of becoming a father. Like when I first watched it, I had heard that like it was like this big meme that like David Lynch won't tell anybody what Eraserhead is about, and it's like nobody knows. And I was like, here we go. This is gonna be a fun one. I'm not sure what's gonna happen. And then by the end of it, I was like, and I don't say this to brag. I really don't. Like there are Lynch films that I've watched and I'm just like at a loss, no fucking idea. But this one I was like, oh, he's just very clearly terrified of having children, and that's what this is about. Like, and then as soon as I did some reading, it was like he had just become a father. That's the primary interpretation. Like even his daughter his first child was like, yes, that film is about me. It's like, okay, so it wasn't just me. That I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty clear. And yes, when we get into the more specific scene by scene analysis, it's going to be a lot more subjective, but I feel pretty comfortable in saying that that's what the film is about, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And I was actually very excited to talk to you about this because I know that you are a father and I don't have kids. I'm probably never going to have kids. And so I'm not able to maybe relate to or feel the film in that way specifically. And so when I was listening to you say how uncomfortable it is for you, I was like, that makes a lot of sense because it's not that uncomfortable for me. I actually have a great time watching Eraserhead, but I could see why someone like you would watch this and be like, this is pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah. So this is the first time I've seen the film since becoming a parent.
Ooh.
So, yeah, I think I was putting it off because I like to go through like cycles of watching all of Lynch's films,
Mm-hmm.
because it's my favorite. So I like to have them on rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one that I've been putting off because I knew the
Uh-huh.
themes and stuff and things that go on in it. Yes, uncomfortable to watch. There is, in some respects, elements of Henry's character that I can relate to. Um, Not the infanticide elements of the story.
I
Spoiler
would
alert
hope not.
for
We're
the
gonna
ending.
have some problems.
Yeah, I just wanted to put that out there for anyone watching. But just the general, it's not. It's just the. It does fade. It's more of a when you're a new parent
Mhm.
than now. It does. It doesn't even phase me now. But when you'll first like take your child home from the hospital and basically the child is your responsibility, it can be very overwhelming and strike fear in you because
Mhm.
it's your life is changed forever basically, particularly if you're a good person and a good parent, your
Mhm.
life is changed to the point of where you put that child first and things like that, and that can have different emotional impact on you because before you have the child you would be able to do what you want when you want, spend all your money on particular things that you want to enjoy, and then that sort of thing changes. So I could see where Henry maybe have that anxiety, or where Lynch, particularly may have had that anxiety of him being very much a free spirited individual that basically just wanted to paint and do art all the time. And now he would have had some sort of commitment to look after another human being, which would have had an impact on his ability to do the art and any other thing that he wanted to do with his time. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I can understand where Lynch is coming from to a certain degree, and definitely made this watch more uncomfortable than previous watches. So we'll say that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you brought up, that it is, sort of illustrating the anxiety of this, um, loss of freedom that he had to kind of set his priorities however he wanted to, because you're right. If you're doing the parenting thing right in any capacity, everything else should probably go on the back burner at that point, right? Or at
Yeah.
least not take the full priority, as it probably was, spending 6 years of his life exclusively making a weird art house midnight film, sort of thing you can't quite get away with as much if you're trying to be a good, responsible parent. And yeah, I don't think David Lynch wanted to kill his kids either. I think it's more just like this extreme kind of nightmarish manifestation of the anxiety of like, oh my God, I am responsible for like the development and the creation and the survival of another human being. Honestly, that terrifies me. And I'm not even in that position. But the thought of it is like, oh my God, who the hell would have trusted me with something like that? Jesus Christ, uh, and then also, this is something I think about a lot, that clearly he was thinking about a lot too. But yes, at a certain point, you are responsible for your child's development, and a lot of how that child turns out is directly because of your actions. But also, there is a certain extent to which the child kind of is what it is. You can't
Hmm.
really change it too much from
No.
what it is at birth. And I was reading that Jennifer Lynch was born with like really severe like foot deformities or abnormalities that had to
She had
be,
clubbed
had to
feet
be
when she was
corrected through
born.
surgery.
Yeah.
Reading that, I was like, man, poor Jennifer Lynch. I bet she had to screen this film in therapy or something. Like, come on.
I
But
know, right?
yeah, it's like if that's just something that is out of anyone's control. It just happens, you know. It's nobody's fault, and it's not a moral failing. It just is what it is, you know. And I think to take that idea to the extreme and to imagine what it would be like to have a child that is not even human and is like
Mm.
intentionally making your life as horrible as possible. Um, that's a scary thought, right? That's not fun to think about. And I think that was something that was maybe on his mind for a little bit.
I think so too.
To go back to your original question,
Yeah, what does
probably
the
10
lady? What
minutes
does the?
ago.
Yeah, about 10 minutes ago. What is
um,
your interpretation of the lady in the radiator?
I think that the lady in the radiator is where he kind of tries to find an escape from the situation that he's put into. Like she's singing a lullaby about how everything will be fine. Um, she's kind of like fucked up looking because it is still kind of like in a Nightmare Bizarro world, but she's like very pretty and very like comforting and gentle and singing with a soft voice and basically reassuring him of everything. And I think that's because it's after his wife has been like, fuck this, I can't do this. You're on your own, pal. Like he's kind of seeking out a motherly figure to either just surrender to and have take care of him, or to just like share some of this burden and be a mother to his child that has left. Um, and then she starts like smashing little Eraserhead babies and shit. And then at the end, after he's attempted, perhaps successfully, perhaps unsuccessfully, it's unclear to me, to kill his child, he ends up back there and like I think they have like an embrace or something. I think that
Yeah.
is essentially a manifestation of his desire to escape and the side of his brain that's telling him that it's okay to just bail on this and to kill his child and have his old life back. Um, that's kind of how I interpret it.
So I feel similarly, except I feel like although the film, as we've said, is generally an exploration of the fear of being a parent, it's also just the fear, just about fear in general.
Mm-hmm.
At least how I see it, particularly if you look into like the circumstances in which Lynch was living when he made the film.
Yes.
So he was living in Philadelphia. He has gone on record to say that he lived there for like 5 years, and he said it was like the worst time of his life. Like he lived in fear every day because the neighborhood he lived in was really run down and there was a lot of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that plays into some elements of the film where Henry, because as I said earlier, the film, the window is bricked off for most of the film in his apartment.
Yeah.
So it's just boxed in and no outside, no look to the outside world. But then there's a scene towards the end of the film where he looks out the window and the bricks are gone, and he sees like a commotion down on the street, like people in a scuffle or
Mm-hmm.
fighting each other or something briefly. And yeah, Lynch has said on many occasions that he saw violent acts on the streets where he lived, and he was, scared for his life at times. Not scared for his life, but he was always felt there was danger around, and particularly coming from, where he come from, like middle America,
Yep.
happy-go-lucky generally, sort of
Mm-hmm.
upbringing, very more. I don't know how to describe it really, but his
It's
polar
a very
opposites of
like
what.
it's a very like pastoral and like kind of all American
Yeah,
like
yeah,
uh idealistic
yeah,
place to
yeah.
be, you know?
Obviously,
Um,
Lynch deconstructs that a lot in his films. The
yes,
idea of this,
yes.
particularly like Blue Velvet and Twin
Mhm,
Peaks and Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, and things like that. The what we see on the surface is not what's going
mhm,
on, but it's just the things he saw when he was a child and where he grew up, and it's just differently a polar opposite to where he was in Philadelphia when he was in his like 20s, raising a family in what he probably considered hell.
yeah,
So I definitely feel that is also inserted into the film a
yes.
lot, along with the fear of being a father and things like that. And yeah, just thought I'd add that
No, I think
note
you're right, and I
to.
think that that's a good, um point because I think that yes, his kind of culture shock into perhaps the most difficult aspects of urban life, as opposed to this more serene pastoral life that he was accustomed to. I think that that probably did a lot to alter his perception of this country and of the and of human nature in general. And I think that yeah, you kind of got at what I was about to get to, which is like in every film, well, in most of his works subsequently, they're not set in this like urban environment anymore. They're set in these very idyllic, very beautiful, um, kind of middle America, Northwest uh, locations like Blue Velvet and like Mulholland Drive and like Twin Peaks. And I think he probably had a very naive idea of what those places were like before coming to the city, and then after coming to the city and sort of seeing it so overt and bluntly, he probably started to notice those elements underneath the surface of the place that he used to think was more idyllic. And I think that that's such a consistent theme through his films is going to the more peaceful places in American society and just shining a light on the horrific, traumatic, violent underbelly that is baked into the history, but also the current culture and beliefs and behaviors of places like that. Um, yeah, I think that this is sort of his exploration into the more overt side of that, and then he kind of gets into the more nuanced, subtle discussions of that in films like Blue Velvet. It's just something that he really comes back to time and time again, especially as it relates to how women are treated, which is
Hmm.
maybe his most consistent theme is
Yeah,
the horrific trauma that women in American society go through all the time, you know?
yeah, yeah, for sure.
So,
Uh,
yeah.
is yeah, really fascinating stuff. I think I had a point that I've completely forgotten now, as to do with oh yeah, the fact that it doesn't surprise me that Lynch first started sort of exploring transcendental meditation during the the
Mhm.
creation of this film, because of how much of like anxiety and stress and fear is baked into the actual product, the actual piece of art at the end of the day, that obviously some of this was bubbling away in Lynch himself, that he probably needed something to help his mind, like just help with his mental health and stuff like that. So I know he's an advocate for transcendental meditation and things like that, so I thought it was interesting that he actually first started dabbling with it during this period of time. And yeah, I know he's gone on to do a lot with it since, but yeah, I mean, it's enough to make anyone question their
Yeah.
own
Uh,
mental health and stuff with dealing with themes like this so
yeah.
strongly.
I mean, not just that, but the actual like physical requirements, time requirements, mental and emotional requirements of creating something like this. Like not by yourself, like you clearly had a lot of help, but also having to rely on all those people for your vision and your pet project was something I kept thinking about. How so many of his friends basically had to like keep giving him money so that he could create his unaltered, perfect directorial vision. And I was just sort of thinking about how difficult that would be for me to do, to
Mm.
like have the ego to ask people for that amount of money for like an idea I had that I can't even fully explain. You know what I mean? Like, I think that that is really fascinating. And I think that that would weigh on somebody, and to just have this one project that is so soaked in existential dread as it relates to the child that you have that is going to be getting older, like, yeah, I hadn't really thought about that either, but you're right that meditation is something that clearly has worked for him and has worked for a lot of people, and something that I've tried to get more into myself. But yeah, I imagine that was challenging to say the least, and it does make sense.
For sure. Is there any final remarks you would like to bring up about Eraserhead before we move on to our second feature here? Any
Sure. I
burn?
love the cinematography. I love the high contrast black and white and the lighting. It's all just so beautiful to look at, even if you don't understand what's happening. I don't think you have
Mhm.
to still get something out of it. Um, I wanted to get your take on the title, because I think that that's what
Okay,
came to him
sure.
first, is that scene where his head is taken to an eraser factory. And I mean, I'm always thinking about titles of films because clearly it signifies something, you know, like that's the first thing you're going to hear about it. And I have
Yeah.
my ideas. It was a little bit harder for me to wrap my mind around it, but I was curious if you had thought
I
about it and what you
don't
think.
have much of a theory on this one because, as you said, I know that the name was very important to Lynch, but as we've discussed, sometimes he just has a vibe
Hmm.
with his ideas and imagery and everything like that, and it could just be down to that. He's just like Eraserhead. That's encompasses my feeling and my general attitude towards everything that I'm depicting in this film. So that's what I'm going to call it. I don't know. The whole factory scene is just baffling to me. Him losing his head in the first place, and then the little boy running off to the factory to then have part of his brain matter inserted into the production line. I don't know if it's just more commenting on just the industrial environment that he was in, because there would have been a lot of factories around, and he just
Hmm.
didn't like that idea of mass production of things. I don't know. Again, another thing of fear, you know, of just change and things not being how they used to be. And yeah, I'm a bit lost on that one. I've
Hmm.
always been baffled by the name of the film. So I'll be interested to see what you think about it.
So as a person with like pretty chronic and often debilitating depression and anxiety, that scene that he said he came up with first, like this idea of a little boy picking up a head and taking it to an eraser factory, really strikes me as the kind of thing that my brain would jump to in the midst of a particularly difficult anxiety attack or depressive episode. Like, there's often this feeling that you just can't handle it anymore, and you really just need something or someone to hit the reset button on your entire brain or just give you a break.
Yeah,
Uh, and so this idea of taking someone's head and thus their entire mind and taking it to a factory where it literally becomes a tool for erasing, um, strikes me as a visual representation of like uh, the character's desire to just completely escape the situation that he's in and the thoughts and the feelings that he's having. Um, that's sort of where I look at it after thinking about it for a while. But in terms of vibes, like Eraserhead is just a really cool word. It just
it
sounds good
is.
when you say it. It
Yeah.
looks good written and it's a cool visual. So, um,
I mean, Henry's
yeah.
hair looks like he's got an eraser on the top of his head, like because he's got that, you know, I don't even know
Hmm.
what type of style hair is, but it's like always up, and but it's never out. It's not like an afro type hair. It's not
Hmm.
bushy around the sides. It's always just straight up. So it's got that sort of like he's the pencil. He's also got like the pocket protector with the pencils and stuff in his suit, which is
Hmm.
interesting. So I don't know if that's
Yeah.
got something to do with like why he has this, if it's a dream or you know, a thought that he's having about what's going on in his own mind and how to cure his ailments and stuff. But yeah, as I said at the top of the show, this is quite tricky to discuss because it's so baffling in places, and even after 4 watches, I haven't come to a conclusion on how I feel about that scene in particular, or
Hmm.
what exactly Eraserhead means. But yeah, I like what you had to say about it. So
I also just love, like, I think my favorite visuals in the film are the ones where the eraser shavings are like kind of like
yeah,
stars in the pitch
yeah,
black
yeah.
space, especially on that Blu-ray. It looks so fucking good. And it's just so
So
beautiful. And I
it's
love it when
amazing.
it, is behind his head and everything. I think it's interesting that nobody seems to have said this in the stuff that I was watching or reading, but I think that that Jack Nance's hair kind of looks like David Lynch's hair.
It does a
Or
little
like
bit,
an
yeah.
extreme version of like Morrissey's hair in the 80s or something like that. Like it's just like a more ridiculous version of that. Uh, so a little bit more of that self-insert thing that I'm
Yeah,
seeing here, you know.
he maintained that haircut for the
Hmm.
whole production, which is crazy. He was so dedicated to the role. I mean, Jack Nance is a very peculiar character anyway.
Hmm.
But he like a trooper kept the hairstyle for the whole 6 years, which is crazy. But you know, dedication to the arts.
Yeah.
Cool. So moving on to our next feature. we fast forward 12 years to 1989, Tokyo, moving from Philadelphia to Tokyo, and we're talking about Tetsuo, the Iron Man, directed by Shinya Tsukamoto. So along with other directors, what other directors were there? Shozin, I never know how to pronounce these names, so I do apologize to anyone listening or watching this. So we got Shozin Fukui and Sogo Ishii, along with Shinya Tsukamoto, who I can say because I've heard people say it, and I'm a big fan of the guy's work. Are like sort of responsible for bringing like Japanese cyberpunk to the forefront in cinema, and with Tsukamoto making the Tetsuo series. So this is a trilogy of films. The first one came out in 89, the second one came out in 92, and the third one escapes me what year that came out quite a long time afterwards.
2009 or something like that.
Yeah,
something like that. I'm not sure.
And the second one's good, the third one is not good. I
haven't seen it. I really like the second one, not as much, but I really like it. I haven't seen the
second one is good. Third one, maybe, if you get, we'll talk about it, but I'm not sure how familiar you are with all of Tsukamoto's work, but it's worth watching for completion's sake and just to get a fully rounded idea of his work. But as like a standalone piece, it's pretty poor in my opinion. But anyway, going back to the film at hand, what is your history with Tetsuo the Iron Man and Shinya Tsukamoto in general?
So I think when the Arrow set was announced is when I first became most aware of it. I'm sure I'd heard something about it here and there. It was probably on a watch list a long time ago or something, just because it's one of those that kind of pops up a lot when you're into the kind of things that I'm into,
Yeah.
And I bought it completely blind. I was like, that looks sick as fuck. I want that. And I just kind of bought it. And then it sat on the shelf for a while. And this is perhaps embarrassing to admit, but this shirt that I'm wearing, when it was announced, I was like, that's the coolest shirt I've ever seen. I guess I better watch it so I can actually buy that shirt. These are the kind of things that motivate actual viewings for me.
Nice.
Yeah. So I watched it and I was like, well, yeah, that was sick as fuck. Super, super into that. And then I've made it since then. I was trying to go through the whole set and I just kind of stopped about halfway through. Something, how it is. Other things came up or what have you.
Yeah.
But I love all the ones that I've seen, honestly. Like, I think that his style is it's so abrasive, but it's also so just uncompromising. And I think very compassionate and emotional at the heart of it. It's a lot of themes of like feminism in some of his later films, a lot of themes of like toxic and kind of masculinity and crisis that he's sort of exploring. Obviously sexuality and kink and fetishes and BDSM and all these other things that I have perhaps interest in. And yeah, in terms of this film in particular, I think I probably, if we're going to be comparing the two films, I think this one's harder to understand and to discuss, but I think I also probably prefer it. Just by a little bit. It's close, And I actually think that this double feature was your idea. And watching them together, I actually think that really makes a lot of sense. I think that they are. I think that Tetsuo is kind of not just highly influenced by, but also kind of in conversation with Eraserhead.
Definitely.
And there are just a lot of similarities in terms of aesthetics, in terms of sound, and in terms of kind of ethos and extremity that these two films share. That I think this would make a challenging but a pretty killer double feature for the uninitiated, as it were.
Can you imagine being like fairly green on any art house cinema and then putting these two films back to back for someone to watch? I don't know whether it's either a sink or swim situation. Either someone would be like, give me more, I need more of this stuff, or I need to stick to my mainstream blockbusters here because this is just too intense. I agree with you. Although Lynch is my favorite director, Shinya Tsukamoto is also in my top 5 directors of all time, and Tetsuo isn't my favorite by Tsukamoto, but I do prefer Tetsuo to Eraserhead for various different reasons. Let's talk a little bit about the Tsukamoto himself. So he was very interested in filmmaking from an early age. He was given a 8mm camera by his dad when he was very young, and he made loads of short films. And then he got into painting, very much like Lynch did. He studied oil painting at school, and then he got into filmmaking, but then sort of lost interest in it, and basically started up these. It's really interesting. I have a book that is out of print now, but it's by the wonderful Tom Mes, who you may have seen on some of your Blu-ray features for a lot of Japanese cinema. He's done some commentaries and stuff, but he wrote a book on Shinya Tsukamoto's whole filmography up to date when the book came out.
Sorry to interrupt you for a second, but I'm pretty sure he's the guy who did the commentary that I watched last night.
There you go.
On the Arrow set. So,
I don't have the Arrow set because I have these. That's all right.
Oh, rip.
That's fine. I just probably damaged a Blu-ray case. These are third window films. I don't know if you've got or seen many of these. So I have all of Tsukamoto's films on that line because they came out quite a while ago now. Well, not super ages ago. The transfers are still like pretty up to today's standards on transfers. But then the artwork on that Arrow set looks fantastic. But then it's an American only release. And although I do import, it was only ever released region A as one of the Arrow's region A only releases. So
we'll tell you what. Arrow's always having sales. Just hit me up. We'll work something out if you really want.
I'm sure there's a bunch of special.
I do recommend it. The box is gorgeous, and the transfers look great. I don't have anything to compare them to, but then also the guy you were just talking about, I think. Oh, I hope I'm right about this. I think he does a commentary on every single one of them, and they are like they build upon each other. Like he's kind of telling a story across the entirety of it. Because when I was watching it last night, he was kind of like, oh, as I mentioned in the last commentary, and as I will talk about further in the next commentary, so it sounds like the perfect thing for you.
You're enabling me now, Celeste.
Well,
viewers out there, we are in a Discord group for a Blu-ray community of people that have similar interests, and we're always sharing what we've bought or how much money we've spent. And sometimes Celeste likes people to keep them in check, when they're maybe on a budget. And this is not helping me save money, but I know I've wanted that set for a long time, but it's just the price has kept me away, and particularly seeing as I already have the discs as well. But because I love Tsukamoto so much, it's all the extras. The extra, and now you're telling me that Tom Mes does a commentary on most of those films in that set. I think I need to get that at some point. But anyway, Tom Mes wrote a really fantastic book on Shinya Tsukamoto, and he basically discusses how Tsukamoto set up these sort of theater troupes, like they're almost like impromptu guerrilla style, where they would just like have a tent that they'd built themselves and like attach like dragons and like sometimes like cyberpunk images onto them and things like that, and they were collapsible, but then they would just pop them up in the middle of nowhere, or advertise sometimes where they were going to be, but in a space, and basically just invite people into this mobile tent and put on performances. And he was really into that for a while. But then it got to the point where he wanted to film these theatre productions, and that's where he got the idea to film The Adventures of Denchu Kozu. Have you seen that one?
Yes, I have.
Is it? I didn't know if it was in the Arrow Sex. It's one of the shorter films. It's like 45 minutes long, isn't it?
And real quick, I just checked the Arrow site because I didn't want to be spreading fake news, as it were. He does indeed do the commentaries on all 10 films in the set. So
thanks for that nugget of information. Thank you. Appreciate that, Celeste. That's great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anyway. And then, so then he got back into filmmaking as he wanted to. film some of his theatre productions, and from these theatre productions, he sort of retained some of those people into venturing into film. So he used some of the people for the Adventures of Denchikozu, as well as Tetsuo, which is his first feature-length film. I'm not sure exactly what the time specification is for something to be a feature-length film, but this film is only 67 minutes long. So it's a nice, tight, lean film. There's no fat on this. And probably for the best, because it's an experience to go into as it is. But
the Motion Picture Academy defines a feature-length film as 40 minutes, and that's the standard that I use for like my personal lists and stuff, and that's the standard that Letterboxd uses. But I understand that most people don't think of it that way. So
I would
but 67 minutes, I think, is comfortably a feature-length film in my opinion.
But even by general expectation and standards, that's still fairly short for a feature-length film.
For sure. Yeah.
So, I think I said this on a video I did recently, or another podcast, I can't remember. But because of family commitments, work commitments, and just general life, I tend to pick shorter running films in the evening when I want to watch something, because I like to, as best as I can, watch a film from start to finish in one go. There are exceptions. For instance, I could not manage like The Irishman, Scorsese film, in one go, because it was like nearly 4 hours long, and I just don't have time to do that sort of thing these days. But generally, I love anything that's like 80 minutes is like a sweet spot. 90 minutes is like amazing, because I know I can get through the film without falling asleep in the evening. But anything other than that, over that, I'm like, or if it's an hour and 45 minutes, I might sort of start fading out towards the end, and I can't be doing that. So it really does influence like my choices of things that I want to watch.
We love a tight 90.
So good. There's a lot to be said about a tight 90. I like that. It's good expression.
Thank
you. And then obviously picking this as a double feature, I was like, oh, well, I know Tetsuo's short, but then how long is the Eraserhead? And it's 89 minutes. And I was like, oh, this is perfect for this week's watching to get prepared for this podcast. So the basic premise of Tetsuo is a salaryman played by Tomoro Taguchi, and his girlfriend run over a man played by Shinya Tsukamoto himself, and he's named the metal fetishist. And we see images of this man cutting open his own leg towards the beginning of the film, and inserting like metal rods that get infected, and then he basically runs out from his little hideaway, cubby hole. And
real freak shit, real freak cinema here.
Certainly is, and I love it. And then he gets run over, and it sort of like goes forward in time, and then we see that these people are maybe having trouble dealing with what they've done emotionally, and are visualizing things that may or may not be happening to them. In like metal is sort of becoming to attach to their bodies, and they get chased by weird, cyberpunk women in train stations, and then there's a drill dick.
Hell yeah.
And one of them, the first time I saw this film, I was equally shocked and delighted in the craziest way, because it was just so bold that it is slightly funny, but also it's so, I don't know how to phrase this properly, because it is humorous, but then it's also so raw because of the effects and the cinematography and the sound design, that it is also utterly terrifying that this has happened. And I'm not sure, let's get into the interpretation of what the metal drill penis means. Celeste, how do you feel about, I'm going to say that a few more times, the metal drill penis? How do you feel about that creation?
What does it mean? generally speaking, I agree with your interpretation of the tone as somewhere between comedic and absurd and disgusting and like grimy and difficult and scary. You know, it flips between those two things, but it likes to be both at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, the drill penis in particular. I don't know. That's certainly. I mean, so we've kind of discussed a little bit the themes that he's interested in. Our director, namely masculinity and sexuality, and I think that
Yeah.
that is just such an extreme visual representation of violent masculinity and of male sexual energy, which is something that permeates the entirety of this film.
Yeah.
Um, you know, obviously equating gender with genitals is not something that I'm super a fan of, but like for the purposes of this interpretation, I understand what is happening here. You know what I mean? It like uh hmm. I think that this film, again, it's going to be hard for me to discuss any one particular thing about it meaningfully without kind of outlining how I feel about it as a whole.
That's fair.
Um, some of this I'm going to be borrowing from the audio commentary because he made some points that I thought were just really good, and I just agree with it. The points that he brought up that I want to kind of explore and maybe add on to a little bit are the class politics and the class analysis of the film. The metal fetishist is very much like a working person.
Hmm.
Is very much he's like stuck in like this hovel, this like single apartment, this like piece of shit, like poor person place. You know what I mean? Like, and he's just kind of struggling.
Yeah.
He's a product of abuse, and um, that this is contrasted with the salary man, which is something that I just thought about as you were talking through the plot synopsis and whatever. By the way, bless you for taking all the pronunciations off of my plate. I appreciate that. Uh,
You're welcome.
but you know, he's somebody like by definition, he's a salaried employee. That puts him in a higher echelon than anybody working for a wage. You know,
Yeah.
as someone working for a wage, like, uh, and it, this class conflict kind of comes to a head when he quite literally just runs over a poor person, and he feels bad about it for like a second, but then he just tosses him in the garbage and makes fun of him and then fucks his girlfriend over the corpse and everything. It's just like
Yeah.
it's so overtly disrespectful and like selfish and
Yeah.
um you know, it's just kind of this visual representation of the clear divide in class structure in Japan and elsewhere, and capitalism, really. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Capitalism.
yeah, big fan over here. There's also, which you know, in the commentary he kind of brings this up too, and he actually supplied me with additional information to actually just think that I'm right about this. I had kind of been like, maybe I'm reading too much into it, being the person that I am, but like this is also clearly a very queer film to me. It's almost verges on like a romance, like a gay romance towards the end. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. There is
and
a lot
again,
of
all this. No, go ahead.
yeah. There's a lot of like sexual imagery and eroticism in this, although it's like encapsulated in some horrific things. There is
Mhm.
definitely, and they're not even undertones. They're blatantly there, but some people may be completely, turned off by that. Other people may not be be the other way inclined towards the content we have on display here. But there's a scene where his girlfriend has like, I don't even know what it is. It looks like a tube Hoover thing. I don't even know what it is, but basically inserts it into a region of this man's being, and
He gets fucked
his
in the ass by like a giant like phallic object by
I knew
his girlfriend.
I knew I could count on you to say it. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
and exactly. And yeah, it's just I don't get it, but I enjoy it.
All right, all right. If you'll indulge me to monopolize this conversation for a little bit, because I think
Go
that the
for it.
queer elements are so interesting. Like the first time I watched it, I was watching it with my partner and my ex-partner. And we were watching it, and then that scene happened, and I was like, okay, that's something. That's interesting. And then the more it went on and it got to the end, and it's actually, this speech is printed on the back of my t-shirt. And I tried to pull it up so I could quote it in its entirety, but um, the IMDb has the last line of it right here. Together we can turn this fucking world to rust, where they literally combine and become one kind of entity. And in the commentary, he actually said that there is a deleted scene where the fetishist is like whispering sweet nothings into the other person's ear, and like they're having like a romantic moment, and like it's way more overt that this is like a romantic and sexual coming together of two men. And that was cut for whatever reason. But I mean, to all of us sitting on the couch watching this, we were like, wait, this is so gay. Like, this is extremely gay, what he just said. Like, that is like a romantic declaration and like one of the most beautiful like speeches I've ever heard in a film. And it's just like, yeah, watching it again and watching that scene, towards the beginning where he's kind of dreaming, fantasizing about being pegged by his girlfriend in a sort of really horrific way. By the way, not recommend it. If you're into that kind of thing, that's not the way I would explore it. But for safety concerns.
Goodness. Yes.
And like, I want to make it clear here, because I was thinking about this last night. I was watching it again. You can absolutely be a straight man who's into being pegged by your girlfriend. Like, there's nothing inherently gay or queer about that, because you're a man having sex with a woman, right? But there is a reality that this is the sort of thing that closeted or, shall we say, men uncomfortable with these aspects of their sexuality, this is a way that they can explore it safely without being gay,
Sure.
And so he's clearly come up with a way that he can explore this while still preserving his heterosexuality. And, there's just so much going on in terms of his own relationship to his sexuality and the film's relationship to masculine sexuality. But, eventually, I just think it kind of culminates in these two people from different class backgrounds that were originally at odds with each other, kind of finding this commonality in their queerness and coming together to like literally take on the world and turn it into metal. I'm not sure what the metal represents. That's something I haven't quite figured out. It could be like, because this industrialization is something that's generally thought of as like a really nasty, seedy byproduct of capitalism, like a really easy way to show you why it's awful. But he kind of seems to invert it and like find like a love in this, and it almost turns into a weapon to destroy capitalism in the capital system that kind of sets these people apart as they've come together in this commonality. It could also just be, I don't know, the gay agenda or some shit, like destroying the city or something. I'm not sure entirely what it is, but I think it's a really beautiful ending. So yeah, with all those thoughts kind of vomited at you, I'm curious what you think.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you just said, and also again, like Eraserhead, where it's like the fear of being a father, and it's also the fear of environment. I do feel that there are elements in this film in which Tsukamoto is having something to say about how technology is altering the human being in general, a la like Cronenberg, Videodrome, how television and things like that is, because he's hugely influenced by both David Lynch and David Cronenberg. He's gone on to record to say that, and you can see the beats. He's very much his own person. He's not like homaging their work, but which is what I like. But you can definitely tell that he's watched these films and is a fan of these films, and it's somehow shaped who he is as a person and how he sees the world. And yeah, I don't know. There's the scene where the metal fetishist is basically inserting those rods into his legs at the beginning of the film, but surrounding him is like images of like athletes, like elite humans, like in terms of like their physical fitness and things like that. And I'm not entirely sure what Tsukamoto is saying from this. Like where does the like if you augment your body, at what point do you become more machine than human? Or is it a positive message he's saying here? I'm not sure. I think it's he doesn't know, maybe, but I feel that the film is ultimately triumphant in where it's going, even though the film is quite dour and like violent in a lot of it, and it's quite shocking. But ultimately, as you said, like the end of the film, they're just like, yeah, we're just gonna go off now and just fuck shit up, basically, because it's what we feel like doing, like just tearing down the establishment, basically, sort of thing, is what I feel like Tsukamoto is going for, because he definitely had an issue with like the establishment as such. So I feel like that's where I feel I'm vibing with the film. So
yeah, I agree with that. That scene that you brought up where he's surrounded by like the kind of peaks of human physicality and athletic performance. I feel like this is maybe a representation of what he aspires to. Like he just surrounds himself by like physical perfection because that's what he wants. But because of the way human bodies work, not everybody can be that. And so he kind of turns to metal and to this sort of self-actualization, self-creation to kind of achieve that despite the limitations of his body, which I think is actually quite beautiful. But also, I forgot to mention this, but it was like 3 films into Tsukamoto's work where I was seeing him in the film as like play one of the main characters, and every time he's like wearing a lot of makeup and looking super androgynous and like looking really hot, and I'm just like, huh, is he like, I couldn't find anything, but like, you know, he plays like what I think is clearly a queer person in this film, and then he keeps like upping these androgynous qualities about himself, and I'm like, is he like, I know that Japanese culture is very different in regards to how they think about and discuss these things, but I was like, that dude's giving me vibes like crazy. Like, I'm just saying, you know.
Yep, I agree. I completely agree with you there.
Just something that I wanted to throw out there.
So let's talk about for a second the visual concept of the Iron Man aesthetic on creation. So he's very much inspired by H.R. Geiger, and we can, you know, it's fairly quite clear if you're aware of Geiger's work that that's basically got his fingerprints all over, you know, Tsukamoto's work in this film. But Tsukamoto also said it was also a combination of Geiger's work with the fly transport pod sort of sub creation at the end of Cronenberg's The Fly, which is also a very apt description of what's going on here. It's just a hodgepodge of everything and very obscured and very difficult to pin down exactly what you're looking at, but it's just a mass of stuff. Very cyberpunk, and I love it. And I don't think this film would work very well in color, I have to say.
I agree. Yeah,
it would. In fact, I think it would be to its detriment that this film in color, because obviously it's very low budget. I mean, he does amazingly with the budget he has. I'm not exactly sure what the budget was, but it's an incredible film for the budget.
I read that he paid for it himself just with his like salary, which, I mean, come on, we're talking about like an astronomically small amount of money to work with in that context.
Yeah, I know he managed to get a lot of people to work on the film for free because they know they respected him and liked his work. But then he also, apparently the production was quite fraught because they were all living in an apartment together during production for like, because the film took like 18 months to make, and a lot of the crew and cast were all living in one space, and they basically all got on each other's nerves, and a lot of cast and crew like left the production, and there was a point where they had no lighting, so basically Tomoro Taguchi had to do the lighting for the scenes in which only Tsukamoto was in, which is really, it's quite interesting. And yeah, the Iron Man suit is the Iron Man suit. We're not talking about Marvel here, guys. The Tetsuo's
the real Iron Man suit.
The original Iron Man suit is it was basically almost like a wetsuit in which they'd like stuck on old bits of TVs, you know, like tube TVs, and taken all bits off of it and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's
Sounds
just
dangerous.
It does, doesn't it? It's very easily take an eye out wearing that suit.
Very laceration prone costume design there, I feel like.
For sure. And the film is very much responsible for reinvigorating the interest in Japanese cinema as well for Western audiences, right. I should say. So obviously, like, there was a big boom of great Japanese cinema. I should say this as a cinephile and huge fan of film. There's never been a poor period of Japanese cinema throughout the decades. It's just general, like, the market for Japanese films in Western audiences for general public had really gone down in the 60s and 70s. Like, generally, a lot of the films weren't marketed or even distributed across, internationally. And this is very much a film that restarted that interest, along with things like, anime and manga and things like that, becoming more popular in the 90s and things like that. And, Japanese cinema has found an audience outside of Japan, and it's still a very insular market, the Japanese film industry. I remember listening to a Third Windows Films podcast, and the guy that runs that label is just one guy by himself who does everything, which is incredible. But basically saying that there's so many amazing films that people outside of Japan haven't seen because they've never been distributed out of their home country. Like, there are no English subtitles for these films, and they've never been released outside of the country, which is like, what treasures are there for us to see? And some of these things we're like, we may never see them unless you're able to get, like, if you can read or understand Japanese without subtitles and things like that. Find it really interesting. So similarities, sorry to skip ahead a little bit here, but is there anything about this film you want to talk about before we discuss some of the similarities between the two films?
Yeah,
that you had a burning desire to talk about?
Just your conversation about foreign films and the way that they struggle to break into American markets is just so deeply depressing to me. And part of one of my big mission statements for my ventures and my channel and my discussions is like, hey, quit being a baby about subtitles and foreign films. Like, sorry to be harsh about it, but like, to limit yourself to only English language speaking films is, to me, not just problematic in that it is limiting the amount of art that you are able to experience, but it's like, what's the word for it? It's not necessarily racist, but it's like you are just thoroughly uninterested in cultures other than your own. There's something there that I find troublesome.
I understand what you're saying. I don't even know if there's a particular word that describes what you're saying, but you're almost intentionally restricting your worldview.
Yes.
By
maybe nationalistic is the word I'm looking for, where like you're only concerned with the tropes and the stories and the people of your own country, or maybe Britain, and that's it. You know, like anyway, maybe that's a little harsh, but like there is something there where I feel like let's get out of our comfort zone and let's explore cultures different than our own for a little bit. And this is such a relatively easy way to do that, in terms of Tetsuo itself, I guess I just want to gush a little bit about the absolutely, unbelievable achievement that it is for him to create these costumes and these stop motion sequences and everything else, like, almost entirely by himself. When I was watching it last night, I was like, I mean, I know I'm watching it right now, but this is impossible, right? Like for one person to do this, like with their own money and their own time and their own talents is like it is impossible, right? Like not there's not a person who could do that, right? Just the sort of thing that I don't even know where to begin in terms of my admiration for something like this. Like I don't see how you do it, but he did,
Yeah,
and it's there,
yeah.
and it's amazing. You know, yeah. That's just me gushing about it for a little bit.
I mean, he's like almost the poster child for a multi hyphenate. You know,
Hmm.
he's a director, he's an actor, he's an editor, he's a sound designer, he's a production, an art designer. He finances his own films, so he's business minded behind the camera. Cinematography. I probably said that already, but any job there is in a film, he's done it in like pretty much most of his films, particularly with like Tetsuo, which is like complete, like so independent, it's ridiculous. It's just a marvel. It's just ridiculous that he made this, and I'm glad it's like got more of an appreciation, and what a lot more people are aware of this film now, because it was not the easiest thing to see for a while, and in good quality, even though it's shot on 16mm, so you're not expecting the most pristine of like quality prints when you watch it, but even the decent Blu-ray. I'm not sure about the Arrow. Is that 4K or is it just a 2K
It's just
restoration?
Blu-ray, but actually, hold on, I still have it pulled up. Let me see what the
But
uh
either way, it looks so good.
it doesn't
As I
say,
said,
but
the
yeah,
the eraser the comparing it to like Eraserhead with the high contrast black and white cinematography and the immaculate sound design, it's the industrial pounding, like constantly, it's like always in a state of movement and urgency, and just constant drum in the back of your head of something's continuously going, gets your heart racing, and just sets the tone perfectly for the film. I can't remember what the guy's name is who did the music,
I can't
because
either. But in
yeah.
the commentary, he was saying that the guy basically just had his own kind of German influenced industrial kind of
Mm.
noise power electronics band that someone gave Tsukamoto a tape of his stuff, and he was like, "Hey, this is cool. You should do a film for me. Just write whatever you want, and I'll make it work." And like I know I can find it other ways, but this score is so good it like bums me out that it's not on streaming services at the moment because
Right.
I just want to listen to it. Like it's my kind of music, like even without the context that it's attached to, and it's just really good. It's good on its own, but it also adds a lot to the experience and the sound design and the themes and the aesthetics and the vibes of the whole thing. You know,
Just wanted to I pulled this review up from Letterboxd earlier. It's by a guy who I don't follow. I probably should now after finding their review of Tetsuo. So probably never going to know that we've made this video, but there's a guy called Edgar Cochran on Letterboxd, and his first line of the review sort of really sums up how probably we both feel about this film. He said, "Imagine that Louis Buñuel and David Lynch had and intense homosexual encounters in a cheap motel in Tokyo under the influence of hallucinogens.
I mean that sounds sick,
Chuck
and that's
chuck
what
in
it
some
is.
chuck in some David Cronenberg, and then we've got a stew going. So so
Yeah,
yeah,
maybe they utilize some props from David Cronenberg films in the sexual acts, and that's how that element ends up in there.
for sure. Awesome. Well, this has been challenging but fun. First and
What a
foremost,
fun note to leave it on.
I know, right? I could have just signed off. Maybe in post, I'll just literally cut the video off here, and then everyone will be like, "What are you going to leave us with that bombshell?"
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, I think that this is a pretty good double feature. It's very heady,
Hmm.
very intense in its themes, multiple lines of interpretation for both of the films. Should say that they're both debut features from two, visionary filmmakers,
Yeah.
both shot in black and white. Both Lynch's wasn't low budget. because he had to keep asking for lots of money from
Well, yeah, but relatively, so I mean,
sources.
it's just like a few
Relatively compared
$1,000s
to a
here
lot of
and
other
there.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's low budget. Both have very got much that psychotronic cult midnight movie vibe going for them, and
it kind of meets at the intersection of art house and cult and horror. That is like that exact combination is kind of like my bread and butter. So I was very excited to talk about these two films because it's like exactly my kind of thing, you know.
It's exactly that. I put on Instagram, I think yesterday, Letterboxd have these like last 4 watched. You know, if you have a Letterboxd account, you know what that means. And yes, obviously Tetsuo and Iron Man have been in my last 4 films that I've watched, and I was just like, yeah, psychotronic cult, you know, weirdo horror films. It's just my happy place, even when they do make me anxious and stuff, particularly Eraserhead these days. But yeah, I mean, I could talk about films like this all the time, and I hope to do so moving forward with the podcast. So yeah, I'd just like to thank you, Celeste, for taking time out of your weekend to talk about a couple of films with me. Yeah, one last time, do you want to plug your channel so people can find you?
Yeah. I appreciate your flexibility with our time zone differences here. And I see that we are approaching a tight 90 on the runtime here. So that's perfect, right?
I love it. I love it. I love that. I'm going to say that so often now.
And yeah, in terms of my stuff, you can find me on YouTube and Instagram at Celeste de la Cabra. If I've done something right, you should be able to type those things into those search engines and find me. You can find me on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/inhumanecstasy. And I will be a little sneak preview for you and your lovely viewers. I will be launching a Patreon like really soon. So
nice.
if that's not up by the time this is up, it will be soon. So if you want to support me in that way to continue in this endeavor of sorts, you know, that would be really appreciated. But if you're broke as shit like me, you just want to watch the videos, that'd be tight too. And yeah, I'd appreciate that. So come hang out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Yeah, so everyone watching or listening to this, if you want to leave a review on the podcast platform that you're listening to, that would really help get the podcast out to more listeners. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give it a like and a comment down below what you feel about our interpretations of these very enigmatic films. And yeah, there'll be another podcast dropping very soon. I've got quite a few different guests lined up for the future. And yeah, this has been a blast. I've had a lot of fun talking to Celeste today. So until next time, everyone, take care.
Bye.